Relationships 101, understanding why things are the way they are. I think I've long since lost track of how many videos I've done about relationship mapping, though based on the ongoing comments, it seems as though there's an enduring, unending need for clarification. So let me take a quote from Monty Python and now for something completely different, and we'll see if this is any clearer than things have been in the past. What I'm going to attempt to do is to explain relationship mapping or modeling in context as opposed to explain relationships all by themselves. So let me first talk about a savings account. There are essentially two kinds of things in the world. There are those things that accumulate and those things that just are. So the money in the savings account is something that accumulates over time. Well, hopefully, otherwise, why would you put it in there to begin with? And though the interest doesn't accumulate, it's the principal that accumulates. It grows over time. The interest just gets added to it. So things that accumulate, like water in a lake or coffee in a coffee cup or refuse in a garbage dump, accumulate over time. They're not instantaneous. And then there are those things which are just variables. They're just values that are part of the relationship that interact with other things to govern the rate at which stocks change over time. So I try to indicate which things in relationships are stocks. There are two kinds of things that exist there, and we call them loops. They're reinforcing loops or exponential growth, and in a moment I'll talk about goal-seeking loops. In any loop structure, there has to be at least one stock. They could be all stocks, but usually there's at least one. Now, in the savings account, the principal periodically interacts with interest rate to create interest, and the interest adds to the principal. Now, notice I've labeled this as same and adds to. The reason being is that as principal increases, interest increases, and as principal decreases, interest decreases, which is why I've said same. It changes in the same direction. And the two parallel lines across it means that there's a delay, and that principal in this particular structure, principal doesn't interact to create interest continuously. Well, in some places maybe it does, but it only happens periodically, like monthly or quarterly or something. So this is just to indicate there's a delay in the structure. And then on this side, notice that it says adds to, so that the interest adds to the principal. So if the principal decreases, the interest decreases, but whatever the interest is, it still adds to the principal to cause it to grow. So this is an exponential growth structure, a reinforcing structure. And typically there is something in the structure that indicates or governs the rate at which it grows. And in this case, it's the interest rate which interacts with the principal to create interest. And as the interest rate increases, the interest increases, which is why this is labeled same. Now, there are multiple conventions for doing causal relationship diagrams. Some of them use S's and O's, which was popularized by Senge in the fifth discipline, and then the typical plus and minus notation that is the oldest one developed by members of the System Dynamics Society. Personally, I've gotten rid of both of them and typically just use color as opposed to trying to deal with the additional notation, because from the color it's apparent what the relationship does. Now, in this structure, there is the whole idea of the loop. I said it's an exponential growth or reinforcing structure. The growth is not something that exists in any one of the parts. It's an evolving or an emerging characteristic of the structure, so that you can't find growth in the principal all by itself or in the interest or in the interest rate. It's only through the interaction of the elements in this structure, the set of relationships, that produces exponential growth. So that's one kind of relationship, but it has two different meanings depending upon whether is the relationship between variables or between stocks and variables, but the relationship between things that influence the way that stocks change, that either adds to, or in the other structure that I'll talk about being filling a bathtub with water, is an attempt to achieve a goal or bring balance between different things. And then in this, there's an opposite relationship. Notice in the goal-seeking structure, I have some goal that I'm trying to attain and some current state, and the difference between those two is an impetus for action that causes me to change the faucet position, and the faucet position causes water to flow, which adds to the bathtub, increasing the level. And as the level increases, the gap gets smaller, and when finally the bathtub gets full, the gap is zero and the faucet is closed, and therefore I don't add any more water to the bathtub. The the emergent characteristic of this structure is it seeks a goal, the goal that I'm trying to accomplish, and therefore I label it to indicate what the structure is attempting to accomplish. Notice that here it's an opposite relation as opposed to an adds to. If there was something that was reducing the amount of water in the bathtub, it would be a subtracts from, because it's modifying a stock as opposed to just changing the value of a variable. Now, so I've talked about two different types of structure, an exponential growth or reinforcing structure, or a goal-seeking balancing structure. And the way that you tell the difference between them is whether or not the number of opposite or subtracts from influences which exist in the loop. If it's an odd number, it's a balancing structure, and if it's a zero or an even number, it's a reinforcing structure. So there might be 2 or 12 or 50 influences within the loop, but you walk the loop and count the number of relationships to tell which type it is. Now, oftentimes, it's difficult initially to identify a goal-seeking structure because people draw them and they don't include what the goal is, so that it's difficult without counting the influences to actually know what kind of a structure it is. Goal-seeking structures, balancing structures, always have a goal, and you should explicitly identify what the goal of that structure is. And you should label the structure to indicate what it is that it's trying to accomplish. The same thing with a reinforcing or exponential growth structure. You should label it to indicate what it is that the structure is causing to grow, and therefore people understand what the loop is tending to create. Now, regardless of how complex or complicated a relationship map actually becomes, this is all there is. There are reinforcing structures and balancing structures. They interact in lots of different ways, which you'll see in the videos that I do after this, and the one immediately after this, I'm going to do one on implications that simply puts a few of these structures together and gives some specific examples. Now, I've labeled these with same and adds to and opposite, which is not the normal way that one would label them. I've labeled them here to try and clarify what the relationship is. The relationship maps are developed to help one understand the way that things behave and how they behave the way they do. And we use them to tell stories. So if I was going to develop this model to tell a story, I would say, as the principal increases, it causes the interest to interact with the interest rate to increase, and that causes the principal to get larger. So I would alter the labels to be something other than same and adds to, because they're not clear in this form. So when I start doing some stories, you'll see a more useful way to label the relationships. And oftentimes, I don't label them at all because it's clear what the relationship implies. So I hope this has been helpful, as opposed to more helpful than some of the ones that I have done in the past. And I'll see you in another video soon. Oh, also this wherever this video is posted in the notes section of this video, there's a context link that will take you to the Perspectives Project, to Relationships 101, and it will show you things that are related directly to this particular perspective and other things in the future. And this is just one of many in a growing set of relationships that are being developed to tell stories about relationships and their implications. So drop by and have a look. Bye.